Hi, my name is Sally Zalon. I've been working in the ECA region on and off in various situations since about 1993, and I've been invited here to talk a little bit about cultural awareness, which we hope will help new staff who come to work in the ECA region who maybe haven't been there before. Now, I'm a British-born Canadian. I'm married to a Swede, and I have American children. And prior to joining the bank, I had lived a long time in Mexico. So that's kind of my own personal cultural starting point. And everybody should know what their cultural starting point is, because you have to understand that these starting points lead you to make assumptions. And the assumptions might be right or wrong when you go to brand new countries. And so you should be aware what it is in your own cultural background that causes you to react well or perhaps badly to something that somebody else is doing, in all innocence coming from a completely different cultural background, expecting to cause a different effect. So that's one thing. Self-awareness helps. When you go to work in ECA, you also need to know right away that you are not walking into a homogeneous region. I think many of us who date back to the days of the former Soviet Union had the view that somehow all of the Eastern Bloc of Europe and the whole of the former Soviet Union was one big cultural blob, somehow Russian, Slavic, and our whole exposure to that was either from political dialogue characterizing people in very stereotypical ways in the press, and perhaps what we saw in the Winter Olympics. And that was about it. And when all of that opened up, it took us quite a while to absorb how incredibly different the different parts of this region are. What we used to view as the Eastern Bloc of Europe now is very much like the Western part of Europe, and you shouldn't go in there assuming anything different. Although the variety between countries is still a fascinating and rich thing. But I want to concentrate a little bit on the former Soviet Union, which we really did think was a giant, frightening, cold monolith, and is nothing of the sort. The variety is amazing. And if you go in there with a cultural assumption that matches a kind of vision of Slavic culture in Moscow, you are going to be seriously off base when you go to some other parts of the region. I'd like to highlight just a couple of places. One is Central Asia. I had worked actually on different countries in ECA for a long time before I finally went to Central Asia. And I had understood that Central Asia was not the same as Ukraine and Russia or Estonia. But I had still made the mistake of assuming that Central Asia was somehow homogeneous in itself. And it's not. And you have to go in and learn anew in each of those countries. Particularly Tajikistan, a country I visited several times, is quite different. The language is not doesn't come from the same roots. It's not from Slavic or Turkic roots. It's more closely aligned with Farsi, and there are elements of that kind of Iranian culture there. There is a graciousness and a way of speaking that is different from the rest of Central Asia and has its own charms. And I think if you travel to each of the countries in Central Asia, you will see the very different effect of history, of wealth, of neighbors. And you see it in the languages, which sometimes blend the Turkic roots and the Slavic roots and sometimes do not. And my plea is basically that you don't assume anything, and when you first get to the country, while you're getting briefed in the country office by local counterparts or local staff, you not just ask for an economic update, but ask for the big no-nos and the things that you should do that are favorable and appropriate when you first meet new people, because they do vary, and you don't want to be surprised and taken aback. Another interesting example in the former Soviet Union is Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is in the Caucasus, and it has its own language, Azeri, that is remarkably similar to Turkish. And Turkish people from Turkey and Azeri people can speak to each other and understand one another just fine. So there is that much similarity between the languages. But while Azerbaijan was in the former Soviet Union, people were educated almost exclusively in Russian. So people over a certain age, over say 38 or 40, have had the bulk of their formal education in Russian and have spoken Azeri at home and in private, whereas younger people have now had part or all of their formal education in Azeri and don't speak so much Russian and don't like speaking Russian often. And you find meetings where you get this kind of cultural schizophrenia, where people who have been trained in the old Soviet system and are much more comfortable in Russian are dealing with a younger generation that is much more comfortable in the traditional national language. And you see people's gestures and way of speaking and way of interacting varying with that. And it comes as a bit of a surprise. It's completely fascinating, and you have to be aware of which world you're in when you're meeting officials. So that was the first point I wanted to make, that this rich cultural diversity is a complete joy to work with, but you need your eyes open and you need a briefing, and you should not assume that anybody is like anybody in a neighboring country or in some other part of the world completely.